Hello and welcome to the DPC Show. My name is Dan Offen, aka Mr. Big Jams. In this show, I'm going to be taking you through the entire week's action across all 6 of the DPC regions, joined by 6 of the world's top analysts who are going to take you through each of their respective regions in as much detail as time will allow, while keeping this somewhat under 2 hours. And in a digestible format. Thanks to everybody who tuned into my first episode, the preview episode, and to all the nice comments I received, as well as the constructive bit of feedback, which I think I've incorporated into this week's show, so this should be an even better viewing experience for you. I'm hoping this will continue to grow in quality as the weeks come, so please keep the feedback going. It is really helpful, and I do massively take it on board. We're going to be kicking things off pretty soon, but before then, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I can be found at Daniel Offen, and that's spelled Daniel and then O-F-F-E-N. And if you'd like to give me any feedback or comments, please do there. Again, if you'd like to financially support me, I can be found on Patreon, and that link to there can be found in the episode description. Before we kick off, I'm going to take you very briefly through the schedule for next week. If you're looking what you should be watching in the next couple of days, it's here. It's made by the wonderful Drop Bear. That's at Corrupt Drop Bear on Twitter. And that gives you a brief overview of what's coming up over the next week. But before the next week, we've got what happened this week, and where better to start than in Southeast Asia, where the wonderful Danog is going to take us through proceedings there. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through your initial impressions of the first week of Southeast Asian Dota.
I'm lucky I'm not a betting man, because 2 out of the 5 series went completely the other way. What I was thinking, the Fnatic and T1 series, I thought Fnatic were really impressive. I thought they brought something new, which was really exciting to see when they 2-0'd T1, who were I think they were number 2 in my power rankings, T1, as well as TNC going down 0-2 against Execration. That was my big one that I really wasn't expecting to see. So the other 3 went to plan, but still, there's enough spice out there and variety and too much to expect that you've really got to be watching every single game of Southeast Asian Dota.
Interesting. Let's dig into that TNC versus Excretion game first. That's the biggest upset, I think, of the region. They're a team that have a propensity to cause these sort of upsets. Would you agree?
I would. We're talking Execration here?
Yeah.
Yeah, just because they have a very, I don't want to say volatile style, but they're very ballsy. They're very all in. And that's just the way that Filipino Dota is played. I think you'll see that as a trend. 22 out of the 40 players in the upper division are from the Philippines. And, the majority of them are made up from Execration, Vice, and Neon Esports. That's 15 right there. And those are the most aggressive teams that you'll see in the entire division. So when you see teams like TNC, who, yes, they've got a few Filipino players themselves, they've got a much more conservative and laid-back style. But the thing that I was really not interested, but maybe even a little concerned to see with with TNC, is that they didn't really change any of the ways that they've played for the past year. It was very obvious. It was very conservative. They play around these key timings of, most of the time it's KP. In one of the games, he got a blink at 11 minutes on Slardar, and they tried to take a few team fights, died a couple of times, and when you miss those key timings, it's just such a big deal that you can't really recover from them. A team like Execration that just goes all in onto, a Bat Rider mid, or I think they picked Dusa POS 1 both games, and they were just great, and it worked out really nicely. I think the position 1 player only died 2 or 3 times across the entire series. And the thing I really like as well with the balls out style of play that Execration have is that if they've got a lead, they're not going to die wondering. He's just like, right, 35 minutes, we've got a 15k net worth lead, rapier time. If we lose, we lose, but we want to go for the win right now, because a quality lineup like TNC is going to be able to punish us if we try and drag it out too far.
Do you think this is a style that Execration can continue to replicate across the rest of the series, or are they going to... Because you mentioned they picked the Medusa twice. Is that going to be a very easily countable pick that people now notice and ban, or do you think they have more strings to their bow?
I think they've got more strings to their bow. I thought BDZ was fantastic on his Earth Spirit as well. So I think a big part of why the Deucer was able to pop off is a big part onto him. Ken's Bat Rider, he got that in both games. So I think that's probably something that's going to change. This Batrider is flexible enough that you don't need to run him mid. You can run him in the off lane as well, but Dusa, it's really a much more, I suppose, niche hero, and you can actually play around it a little bit with the right hero picks. Batrider, much harder to do. So I think a lot of teams need to not worry so much on what Yoe is playing in his position 1 role, and just more about the supports that are going to enable that to happen.
Okay. And then do you think it's a style that was very similar across both games, or was there variation? Have they settled into a groove across those 2 games?
Well, the thing that I thought was quite odd is then it was more about how TNC played, to be honest. Like with KP that I mentioned before, with his timings being the key go factor, I thought I saw him go like a Falcon Blade as the first big item on his Void Spirit, but that doesn't really set up any kills. That just makes it's nice transitioning item, I suppose you could call it. It's really the Yule Scepter that you need to start going for these pickoffs that then transition into tower pushes. But he got that as the second item, so it felt like it was a little bit delayed. And against a Dusa, you don't want to delay. You just want to go right now, especially now that Vengeful Spirit isn't really a support hero. So there's much fewer ways to actually like just secure an early laning phase or avoid ganks as a Dusa. You've just got to all in onto it. And I feel like it was just one of these situations where it was a team matchup that just doesn't work quite well in TNC's favor. So I think they're really going to need to put in some work on how to deal with this hyper-aggressive style of Dota that, well, they're definitely going to need this week, because they're coming up against Neon later in the week. So they're another one of those real aggressive teams.
Do you expect they can turn it around? Is there a sense of they need to find something new and fast, or could you almost take this game as a little bit of starting nerves and anomaly, as it were?
I don't think a team like TNC should have nerves, to be honest. Like, they've been I would say top of the region, honestly. Like, yes, they haven't won every tournament, but, Motivate Trust doesn't exist anymore. You've got players splintering off here, there, and everywhere. And the tournaments that they weren't there, TNC were in either first or top 3 contention very easily. So I think they just need to try and add a few more strings to their bow, kind of like what Fnatic did. When they played up against T1, they brought out the POS1 IO, worked very well. It was helped by the fact that Jackie diebacked on the Wraith King to sort of end the game. But, just little things like that. Moon as well, I think he's really stepped his game up. It felt like he was lacking for a fair amount of 2020, but Monkey King mid popped off amazingly, won the lane. Puck, he's always been really good at the hero, and I think the hero got more buffs than it needs, especially in the Southeast Asian region. They love Puck. So, yeah, I think TNC just need to try and add a few new things to their playstyle, because they got exactly what they want. They got Mirana, they got Phoenix, they got these style of heroes that are very central to how they play. But if you've played that style for 1.5 years plus, people are going to know how to play around it.
Let's move into, you mentioned and alluded to Fnatic versus T1 there. That was a 2-0, which less of an upset, but maybe people thought that series was going to be a little bit closer. Were the games close? Was there a sense that T1 could have won those, or were they outclassed?
T1 probably should have won game 1, I believe. They had like a 10k net worth lead, and yeah, it was just one of these team fights where they went all in onto this one team fight with the dieback from a Jackie Wraith King, and then once you've got a Wraith King on the sidelines for 100 seconds where they've just funneled everything into him, which is what worked for this old, Geek Fam T1 style roster, when he was playing things like the Spectre, that can instantly rejoin a team fight. But with a Wraith King, it's a little bit harder. And so I'm interested to see how this position 1, the new position 1, even though he's been doing it for the past couple of months with this roster, is going to flesh out. I think it's not quite as much disaster stations as some of these other teams, because I feel like Fnatic played really well. So I think you can't look too far into T1's performance. It should just be big check mark for Fnatic. T1 just average, basically.
Where do you think the strengths for Fnatic came from? Is it, you mentioned Moon earlier, putting an incredible performance in on that puck. Were there other strengths coming out of the Fnatic team?
I think honestly, like, Moon has always been the barometer for Fnatic for me. If he plays well, they win. If he doesn't, it's up to someone like Jabs to carry the game, and he didn't even need to carry the game. Like, he played a very good Enigma game. I think he played, what was his other hero? Maybe it was a Mirana or something like that. But he was just always a really solid position for DJ. He's taken this back seat. He's played Elder Titan and Ogre Magi in this series. Not crazy, huge, wild playmaking heroes like we're used to seeing him with his Enigma, with his Earthshaker. But, it gets the job done. So I'm happy to see Fnatic really come out of this. It feels like they've been like in Dragon Ball Z hyperbolic time chamber, and they've really put their time to work for sure.
Are there any other matches that you think this week deserve a bit of a highlight?
Just for what it means for 496 against Boom. Like, Boom, they lost their first series as well against Neon. I was kind of expecting that because the Neon roster, like I mentioned in last week's show, they've had really good results coming through from their scrims, and it's shown here. They're at the top of the league. They're sitting at 2-0 in the series scores, and Boom, they just added Drew instead of Dreamer Cell. So that's the real one that I'm a little bit more shaky about, because it felt like Drew was disconnected from his team for a lot of these key team fights. I can count a number of them where he was essentially just running around for half of the team fight, not able to hit anything. Some of that can be due to, not being as familiar with the way that the team plays, and some of it can actually go down to the hero picks as well. He got a position 1 Bloodseeker and Lifestealer, and I think they're nowhere near top tier picks.
Yeah.
So some credit can be given to Neon for, good drafting, not letting that happen, some block picking as well. But I feel like there's at least 5 or 6 position 1 heroes that are higher up the rankings than Bloodseeker and Lifestealer. So I'm not going to throw everything away for Boom, but I think, we need to see how he plays on the Riki, the TB, the Troll, the Weaver, these style of heroes that are actually relevant in the meta right now.
Those are 2 teams that we've seen twice, 496 and Neon. Have you noticed trends coming from those 2 teams that we've been able to watch a little bit more of? Have we got more of a sense of them yet?
I think that the thing is, there's nothing really surprising about the overall macro way that they play. They're just going to run at you every single time. It doesn't matter what heroes or whatever is in the meta. They'll find a way to run at your face. I mean, I think in the Neon game, it was 14 minutes and there was 38 kills. And then by 18 minutes, there were 52 kills, and 42 of them were Neons. So, and that was the crazy game with the Keeper of the Light, where he gets the ultra kill before the horn even sounds. It's great to see Southeast Asian Dota at the top of the R.Dota 2 subreddit, by the way. I think the last one, ironically, that was at the top there was, again, Neon in ESL 1 Thailand, where Yopaj uses Storm Spirit to steal Aegis through a chronosphere that comes down right on top of Roshan. So it's great to see these individual plays coming out, and I want to see it highlighted more and more. So if you're someone that doesn't watch the Southeast Asian region too much, Neon's definitely your team, because they're going to give you these wow moments.
And that's references a tweet by friend of the show, Knoxville, which you sent over, which says that since TI5, there have been over 5,000 pre-horn team fights resulting in a kill, and 133 5v5 fights, but just 2 resulting in 8 kills. One of those was Neon versus 496. And if you haven't watched that clip, I'd go and track down that tweet or find it on Reddit. It's a crazy little team fight. I mean, the amount of illuminates he manages to hit is close to insanity.
It's insane. And the other team fight that I think it was back, I forget what it was even qualifying for, but it was another Southeast Asian game, the only other game that's had 8 kills pre-horn. So it's a mile a minute action. And I mean, it always helps in a game to have a 0-minute medallion pickup. I think the earliest one prior to that was at 7 minutes or something like that. So definitely helps for the laning stage, and it set up Neon for a good victory coming up there against 496.
There was another image you sent over about a good start. Do you want to run through that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So that's BDZ talking in his Facebook, just his public Facebook, saying "Ooh, what a great start!" And that's actually Gabby replying to him in Tagalog there, just saying, "Look, it's hope you have a good start in all of your games moving forward," essentially, is what you can extrapolate that one. And the response again from BDZ is, GG, well played, boss, just got lucky. So even though there's obviously some dramas coming around with a lot of these teams, you've got the El Clasico of the C scene with TNC and Fnatic and this sort of stuff. Within, like I mentioned before, the 22 out of the 40 Filipino players, they get along really well, and they just want the best for each other. So it's good to see this friendly rivalry coming through.
Just before we close up, a little bit on the meta of the Southeast Asian region. Are there any particular trends that you've seen come out in only Southeast Asia that people won't have seen in any other regions?
I'd say probably they're using a lot more Keeper of the Light than a lot of other regions, and they're also banning it out first phase if they can't pick it up themselves. I think Coddle plus Troll, Coddle plus TB is just way too strong right now, and I feel like anything that's just going to enable you to fight more and more is always going to be highly prioritized in the C region. So Troll's really good because the Ags is good for team fighting and for farming, especially if you compare it together with a Coddle. Same thing with things like Earth Spirit or Tusk or Phoenix, great team fighting heroes, Keeper of the Light, all these styles of things. Europe is probably the only one that rivals the aggressiveness right now of the Southeast Asian region. So yeah, definitely excited to see.
We've seen a lot of Keeper of the Light everywhere, but is it SEA getting even more, like an over-index on an over-index? Wow, let's keep a lookout for that one then, because that's going to be one of the top picks. Let's move into next week then, what we can expect to see coming up over the week beginning 27th of January, or 25th of January even. In the upper division, we've got Vice versus TNC on the 27th of January, Extinction or Execration, I can never remember what their name is.
Execration,
versus Fnatic on the 27th as well. 496 versus Boom on the 28th, and TNC versus Neon, and 496 versus T1 on the 30th. Are there any particular matches there that you'd highlight?
They're all, it's so early on that they're all so relevant, right? The first day, Vice and TNC lost their series, and I feel like in this league format, you can't afford to lose more than 2, maybe 3 series if you're really going to put yourself in contention to get to that major spot, because there's only 3 in Southeast Asia, and one of those is a wild card spot. On top of that, given that there's only 2 majors this year because of things being pushed back a little bit, it means even just where you finish in the league is so important. Like if you get first, you're basically going to TI, even if you completely bomb out of the major. So I feel like that's so important there for TNC in particular, to be able to really just stamp their authority and say, look, Vice, you play aggressive, but we learned our lesson coming up against Execration, your Filipino brothers. So we'll see if they're able to turn that around. Execration and Fnatic, 2 wins on the board for both of the teams. So they'll be looking to continue that undefeated streak. Boom, again, they really need this win coming up against 496. Although 496, as we've seen, really impressive being able to take a game off Neon, who I think are really the favorites now, just based on how they played both of their series early on. And which makes the TNC versus Neon series really important, right? Because assuming TNC does win against Vice, which should happen, I wouldn't be surprised to see TNC 1 and 2 after the second week, and then T1 as well. They need to get their mark on the board too. So if you had to pick one series, TNC Neon, but it's all looking really good for Southeast Asian Dota, and that's just the upper division.
And the lower division as well. We haven't got much time left, but is there any particular matches or teams that you think are surprising people?
I would say Army Geniuses is definitely surprising people. Full Indonesian squad. They barely scraped into the lower division even. The only reason they're there is because the Assault team got banned for match fixing, and then they got that 3rd place decider match that they ended up winning, and now they've got a 2-0 record. And the only other really surprising thing would be 0-2 going 0-3 so far. And you've got some really impressive names on there. Dreamer Cell, Old Boom Carry, In Your Dreams playing POS 4, Polison, very much staples of the Southeast Asian scene, and they're winless right now. So what was a hope to potentially get into the upper division is now a holy crap, we got to start winning some games or we're just going to be out of lower division. In terms of games to watch from that, all of them, because me and Aries are casting this week. So make sure you tune in.
Great. Okay, we'll leave it there then. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Thank you to Danog for taking us through Southeast Asia. Danog can, of course, be found on Twitter at @Danog. He is great, and you should follow him and continue to support him. We, however, are going to be rocketing on straight away, moving at breakneck speed to South America, where 1437 is going to take us through goings-on there. Okay, so just to start, talk me through your initial impressions of South America Week 1.
Right. Week 1, I didn't really have some expectations going in. I just had an open mind. I just wanted to see what these guys were made of. A lot of them weren't really able to play in a lot of tournaments before. And this was a great time for them to showcase it. And watching them play, I feel it's a lot like how Southeast Asia used to be in previous times. Very aggressive play styles, very like, bang your head in and until like something works out, and then like once it does, they just kind of like stick with it and keep going with it. So I really like it because of the entertainment that it can bring to every game. I mean, it's just constant aggression, constant fighting. And I did notice that there's also like a couple teams that are just really like so much better than some of the other ones in Division 1.
So going from that first week on the games that we've had, what matches do you think really stood out for you when you watched them?
There were a couple that was really good. I think the biggest one was probably Thunder Predator versus Infamous. Thunder Predator was thought to be the top 2 team in Division 1, and what ended up happening was they lost against Infamous, who people didn't really have high expectations for. But Infamous is a team where there's 2 players there, Angel and Jeans, that really impressed me with their playstyle watching that series. They actually 2-0'd them. And because of that, it's going to throw like a huge wrench into the entirety of the South American DPC, and especially the slots going to the major. There's only 2 of them. And if you want to get top 2, you pretty much have to go like 5-1. Right? 6-1. So it's really hard for you to lose this game against a team that you weren't supposed to lose to and then still expect to get top 2.
So let's dig into that series a bit. I did watch that one, and I remember watching it. It felt like Infamous weren't an underdog. Often when you get an underdog victory, it feels like it's kind of a scrappy win, or they slightly cheese their way to it. They just seemed to me like a better team than Thunder Predator. Is that your analysis of it?
I think what ended up happening in that series was Thunder Predator went in thinking that they were going to dominate the game. And they might have not put enough time into understanding how this Infamous team would play and what they would do, and analyzing and like trying to counter all those things. Instead, Thunder Predator went into the game just thinking like, okay, we just play our regular game. We're just going to win. Because when I watched Thunder Predator play, they sort of just autopiloted the whole game. They didn't really do any of the small things that will net them the small advantages that you would see when you watch other tier 1 teams in other regions play, and like secure the game through that. So maybe Thunder Predator, they were just a little overconfident going into the series. And that's why Infamous looks so good, because these guys came out like, yo, this is the DPC. This is our chance. We're going to like show everything we have. And then they just played it out, and their strategies were spot on. When they were actually losing majority of those games in the early games, and then they would just like split push nonstop, not getting caught out. And as soon as they had these item timings, they just went full aggressive, and that's a sign of a really good team when it comes to Infamous. So a lot of these guys, like maybe Beast Coast, SG, these guys are going to need to really study Infamous, especially when the week that they're going to play them, because Infamous is going to be like a black horse, or is that what you call it? A black horse, right?
Yeah, that's
a dark horse. Dark horse.
Yeah.
There we go. That's the word. Yeah, dark horse. Yeah, dark horse. That's what I think Infamous is going to be in this region.
And Thunder Predator, they kind of got dominated and they weren't quite as ready as you just mentioned. Do you think it's just a case of them gelling a little bit more and really kicking into gear for the next match, or do they need to make more wholesale changes?
I think they just got to wake up, man. Like Thunder Predator, they just got to realize that this DPC is not a joke. I mean, in the previous tournaments they played in, they dominated the South American teams. And then they even dominated the North American teams in a lot of tournaments they played in. But now it's like it's just the South Americans. Maybe they're looking down on their region as well, because they're like, oh, we were able to beat all these big North American guys. Like these guys should be easy. So it should be like a wake up call. Maybe they gotta dial it down a little bit in terms of like how much confidence they have, and like try to focus more on the studying and like understanding the game at a deeper level aspect, so that they have that edge over all these other teams instead of just relying only on their individual ability.
So would you say they're kind of picking almost without strategy? They're just kind of picking maybe their best heroes. They're going, oh, we'll just outplay them. We don't really need to think about this on a deeper level. Whereas you'd prefer to see them build a more cohesive strategy.
I think they got to just work on like their team as a whole, and instead of playing like solo gameplay. Because when I watched that series as well, you would see a lot of the cores doing their own like individual actions on the map instead of like grouping up earlier together, or like the catch hero buying catch items and like setting his team up to get these important pickoffs on the map instead of just like late game being lazy, going together as 5, just like banging your head against a high ground or something like that. Just more yeah, trying to having a hard time find the right word. It's like high Dota IQ plays, like something like that. You just gotta think about like how you can outplay your opponent as a team and less as an individual player on the team.
Makes sense. I want to go briefly into, or in more depth actually, into the Beast Coast games. They won both their games 2-0. Last week with Bowie, we highlighted that they're probably the favourite of the region. Is that your analysis as well? Is that further cemented by these two results?
Oh, they absolutely dominated the games. I think the first game that they played against EGB, the laning stage looked a bit shaky, but the Beast Coast, they have like this philosophy of like how they want to play, and it's so different compared to every other team in this region. And because of that philosophy that they have, I think it's the edge that they have over everybody else as well. Like they just absolutely crush it. Like EGB, I think they were up maybe, I want to say 8 or 9k gold with a Lycan on their team, and they were just like really dominating, but they stopped putting the aggression together as a team at some point. Beast Coast, while they were down 8k gold, they're like, okay, we got our item timings, let's just go high ground. Let's just force something. Let's make EGB make mistakes. And that's exactly what they did. And EGB had like a Enigma on their team in that game, and he just whiffed like 3 or 4 really bad black holes just because of the way that Beast Coast played, how they pressured, even when they were behind. So for me, at least, watching all the teams, like they've been the most impressive in terms of like having the potential to just dominate game after game without anybody being able to stop them.
Did we see a similar play style in their 2-0 against UNK? That ability to just quickly turn on the game and pressure?
That was much cleaner. I think the EGB game was the first game of the DPC, and maybe they were a bit like shaky or something like that. But the game against UNK was absolutely clean, and they just dominated. There was like a 0% chance for UNK to even play those games.
Something I wanted to ask about Beast Coast is obviously a lot of people who have watched Dota for a number of years will know that Beast Coasts were the Wraith King team. That was one of the most well-known picks. It was one of their specialist picks, even when Wraith King was more of a niche hero. Now when Wraith King is being picked in pretty much every game in every single region, how do you think that affects them as a team? Is it a benefit to them that Wraith King's now strong, or is it a disadvantage now that it's not really a pocket pick anymore?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a good point too. I think it's going to be a little bit of both for sure. K1, it's not really about Wraith King itself, but I think he's just an amazing player in terms of how he farms and his farming patterns. That's what makes him so good. Actually, it's a funny story. I was talking to Artur just like last week, and I was asking him, why don't you go play a pub? Because I was trying to watch some pub games. And then he's like, I can't. I'm watching a K1 replay. And I'm like, oh, let me guess. You're watching Wraith King. And he's like, yeah, I'm watching Wraith King. And I was like, oh, K1 had a video I think he did with Bowie or somebody else on YouTube about his Wraith King. He talked about his farming patterns, what to do with the hero. And it was in his language, obviously, but it was translated into English subtitles. So, and I told him about it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go find that. It probably still, like, a lot of stuff there, a lot of concepts there probably still work. So there's a lot of, like, pro players who really respect him in terms of, like, his abilities for that. But yeah, going back to the point about the Wraith King, I think it benefits them, but I don't think they're going to, like, overplay their hand on this Wraith King. They're a very confident team. They just draft according to what they think is good for the game. And they're not going to always draft for, like, just the tier 1 hero. Which I've noticed with BC. And yeah, I mean, Wraith King is just such a strong hero. They played one game against EGB. Against Unknown, they didn't play it. So I really don't think they're going to keep pushing that forward.
Just briefly, let's go into the other games in the region we haven't mentioned. So Ego Boys versus LATAM Defenders. We're 2-1 to LATAM Defenders. And SG versus No Ping. Was there any highlights from those games from you, or did they feel quite routine?
The SG games, that was a little bit interesting. SG is considered to be probably the third best team, something like that. Maybe they're the ones who can make a run at getting top 2. In game, I believe it was game number 2, they were dominating, like really dominating. They had a huge goal lead. They had this Terrorblade DP combo that was just like ready to go into the high ground, and they decided not to go high ground at all. So and because they didn't do that, they gave an opportunity for the opponents to like farm up their items, get the items that they need, even though they were turtle back in the base. And once they got like this big items, especially on No Ping's Enigma, and they got the refresher, SG's game looked horrible after that. So they didn't really push their limits. It felt kind of like they played more to not to lose, and they were worried about everything instead of like playing so freely like all the other South American teams normally. So I think there is one factor with SG is like they're a very patient team. You can say that about them, which might be also something that would help them win in games where they're like a little bit behind, but they're not really so good at playing aggressively and asserting their dominance, especially when they're winning the game. I think that's a little bit of a worry for me, but hopefully if they fix that, I think this team is going to be really a tough matchup for teams like Beast Coast and Thunder Predator.
Okay, we'll watch out for that then. Just to close up and to look over to next week, the matches we've got coming up next week on the 27th of January, we've got UNK versus Thunder Predator, Ego Boys versus No Ping. On the 29th, we've got Infamous versus UNK and Beast Coast versus LATAM Defenders. And on the 30th, we've got SG versus Thunder Predator. Are there any matches there that you would pick out as must-watches for people who've only got a bit of time?
If you want a game where it's going to be real scrappy and a bunch of kills and a lot of stuff happening, I think EGB versus No Ping is the game to watch. TP versus Unknown, I fully expect TP to be like coming back and dominating the series. Infamous versus Unknown, I think that could be interesting, but Infamous is just, in my opinion, a far better team, having watched them last week. Beast Coast, Latin Defenders, that's going to be Beast Coast. I mean, unless Beast Coast just decide to like not show up and like they don't prepare anything, then yeah. But I think these teams, like especially because you're only playing pretty much one series a week, they look forward to that one series. So it's important that they're gonna study and do everything just to win that. And SG versus TP, that's the game that is very, very important. This is like a must-win series for Thunder Predator. If they don't win this, the chance of SG making it to the top 2 just skyrockets. Because SG is already up 1. Thunder Predator is down the 1 series against Infamous that they probably shouldn't have lost in their opinion. That's 100% must-watch series. Because these two teams, big game. Both of these teams are going to give it their all. And obviously, I think it's the end of the week. So it's been about like 10 days or so since both teams would have played a series. And that's important because that means your information that you have on that team might not be so accurate. Yeah, and then there's going to be a huge changes. So might be seeing some playstyle changes as well. Yeah, that's a huge must 100% watch.
Okay, we'll watch out for that one then. But thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Brilliant. Thank you to 1437 for taking us through proceedings in South America, one of the most exciting regions to watch, I think. He, of course, wasn't joining us for the preview episode, so I'm excited to have him on board from now on, and he'll be continuing until the end of time, I believe. Next up, we have CIS, where Mo Farah is going to take us through proceedings there, as always. I noticed, listening back to this, there are a couple of Discord pings that I forgot to miss, so if you notice those, you've not got a message, it's me fucking up. So sorry about that. But other than that, it's wonderful, so please check it out. Coming up right now. Okay, so just to start, talk me through what you think's happened in CIS this week.
CIS has been, for you original week 1 watchers out there, guys, we talked about how there were like 2 groups of 4 in the upper division. It was like the invited teams to Division 1, which was VP, Na'Vi, Spirit, and Live to Win. And then the bottom 4, which was, oh god, I have to remember off the top of my head. Where is it? It's Extremum, the No Techie Stack, Unique, and Empire. And all the direct teams that got invited all won their games. and all the teams that didn't get invited lost all their games. So that further solidifies already that there's kind of like two separate fours. Okay,
your incredible analysis of the teams that got invited are better than.
It's fantastic. I know. Don't hate me. All right. I would probably say, I mean, the most recent game that's just happened that we ended the week on was VP versus Empire. We talked about how VP were the massive favourites for the group.
Mm-hmm.
They'd just taken a final against OG 3-2 in Epic League at the end of last year, and they looked fantastic. I mean, GPK single-handedly took over game 2, I personally think, and just controlled the tempo the whole time. Empire was this team that we were I was personally really hoping for. They might show us, they've got some new talent. They've got Gwynblade, they've got Petisha in the 3 role, but it didn't really quite work for them. The team that I'm really worried for is No Techies, who have played 2 series this week and have lost both of them.
Yeah, both of them 2-0, which a lot of people might have been surprised because that's, if you don't know No Techies, it's the solo stack. Are they a disappointment, or is it a bit of kind of early nerves, perhaps?
It was quite disappointing from them. There was a couple of games they GG'd quite relatively early in. I mean, you have to say the game was, not looking good for them at all, but there was no high ground defense or anything kind of thing. So that was a little bit surprising. But for me, they look sloppy. They look a little bit slow almost. I mean, they've played some difficult games. They've played Na'Vi, and then they've played Live to Win as well. Mm-hmm. So they've played 2 of the more difficult teams. But the thing is, if you want to come higher up in the group, you have to be beating these teams that are supposed to be finishing above you. And if they've lost to 2 of them already, I don't see them breaking into that top 4 now, unless they somehow beat they somehow beat like Spirit or something, which I think would be really difficult. But the top 4 teams that got invited, they all looked really good, like individually in their games. I think Na'Vi in particular, last season they played a lot of like tempo, like these early pushes around like BKB timings. Iceberg used to play a lot of mid doom, and in like game 1 of their first series, they just picked mid doom again. Like it's a new patch, new year. Iceberg's still playing mid doom. It doesn't matter. So I think some of the games all the games were 2-0. I mean, that's the most important thing to point out. None of these top 4 teams have played each other yet. And so I think there'll be bigger series to come.
So would you perhaps describe this week 1 of CIS as a bit of a foundational week? It's confirmed a lot of the biases we thought we had about the region, that there's these strong 4 teams and 4 weaker teams, but that we've not really learned anything radically new about the region.
Yeah, I would say Spirit were the team that surprised me most with what they drafted. They kind of played 2 completely different games in both the game 1 and game 2. They played like an AM game in game 2, and then in game 1 they played kind of like more of a tempo-based lineup. So it's nice to see them doing something different. Last patch, I was a little bit worried for Team Spirit that they were going to be like not a one-patch team necessarily, but I wanted to see them be able to transition into a new patch and be able to play as confident and comfortably as they were before, and they did that. So, like we said, there'll be bigger tests for them to come when they play against these other top 4 teams. But for now, looks, relatively solid.
So let's dig into that first game, the Extremium versus Team Spirit game. I think last week we did highlight Extremium as a possible contender. What went wrong for them in that game? Are they 2 close games, or is it 2 runaway wins for Team Spirit?
Game 1 was... They looked okay, but there was like a lack of... it felt like there was a lack of almost like hard direction and team fighting almost. Like they were a little bit sure, should they be fighting in this area? Should they be fighting in that area? And I think the vision difference made a lot in that time. Let me check. I think they played with a stand-in. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah. So for game 1, they played with a stand-in, which Magical stood in for them instead of Melodule. And you could tell they weren't quite on the same page. I mean, it got a little bit better in game 2. There was... they played against Toronto Tokyo, picked AM, and they had a Wraith King on their team, and they realized the game was kind of slipping away from them, and they went for an all-in play with a Rapier on their Wraith King.
Okay.
And the fight didn't go well for them. They lost the Rapier and they ended up losing the game. But it was in that kind of sense, it's nice to see them realizing and reading the game well, that they knew it was slipping away from them, and they had to try and make that all-in play, because the later the game went, the harder and harder it was going to get for them. So it kind of gave me hope in that sense. But they did look a little bit outclassed by Team Spirit.
And Team Spirit were perhaps towards the bottom of that 4 that we had at the top of the region, perhaps. Would you agree with that? Are you now more confident about them?
You would power rank them probably third or fourth, I'd imagine.
Mhm.
You know, you put VP as your 1, your Na'Vi as your 2, and then it's like Spirit and Live to Win are kind of like battling for, like, they're trying to push into that top 2 almost, I would say. It did give me hope for them, but they looked convincing on the new patch. You know, they looked convincing in the first official series. And I think it's really important that when you play these teams that you're supposed to be beating, in air quotes, that you beat them convincingly.
Mhm.
Because the top 4 showdowns are going to be the ones that make the difference in these like top 4 standings.
Let's go into Team Na'Vi. They're the only big team that we've seen play 2 matches this week. They beat Unique 2-0 and No Techies 2-0. You mentioned the mid Doom already. Was there anything else that came out from Na'Vi that's new? Are there any surprises from the team?
Now, I watched a Na'Vi game. I watched both the Na'Vi games, and at the end of the second series, which they picked Chen in game 1 and game 2, and they'd won both games, I put in big capital letters and put a circle around when is Chen going to get banned? Because they played around like a really good timing where they would have like Chen Beastmaster or like a Batrider mid, and they would hit this timing in the game, and they would group up as 5 and just force engagements. And they were so clean with their team fighting a lot of the time that it was difficult to deal with. I think Iceberg has looked incredibly good in his games so far. He's played some TA, he's played some Storm, and I would be frightened to lane against him. I've mentioned GPK already. I cannot wait until VP play Na'Vi and we get to see those two battle out against each other, because they are both high tempo players, and I think it could be a very volatile matchup in the mid lane.
So Na'Vi, you mentioned the Chen. They've picked Chen 3 times, and their wins with that hero are an average of about 24 minutes, I would say.
Yes.
I've not seen Chen. I've been watching obviously a lot of DPC this week. I've not seen Chen crop up as much as that in 75% of games. Why do you think it works particularly well for Na'Vi, but it hasn't necessarily been a top tier pick elsewhere?
I think for Na'Vi's playstyle, though, in particular, you know, with trying to work this early tempo, if you can get your Chen to a good mech timing, then you can group up relatively early and start taking towers. You know, that is a hero you can group around with the Hand of God, with the mech, this big sustain. I also think the recall ability is still, you know, massive on that hero. So these heroes like Chen, Wisp, we're seeing a huge amount of Keeper of the Light as well with the recall ability on that hero. It's going to be a hero that I think teams have to start considering whether they need to ban it. Because whereas Keeper of the Light doesn't really hit that same timing that Chen does, which Na'Vi love to play around. And when you have such an active player like Iceberg that plays these heroes like Storm and TA, if you're recalling that hero into fights while they're split pushing at the same time, they are going to cause some serious damage, and you're going to be able to outnumber them and try and take pickoffs. And Na'Vi are confident in their team fighting ability, so they'll be looking at that hero a lot more, I'd imagine.
You mentioned Keeper of the Light, though. It's obviously been a fixture of the entire DPC this first week. I think everyone's been pretty much picking it constantly. It seems to be less picked in CIS from what I can see. Is it getting first banned, or is it just slightly less popular in CIS than it is in other regions?
Live to Win picked it
they
twice.
Picked it twice, yeah, but no one else has.
So Seneko obviously really likes that hero. I think position 5s in general are quite like, we know what we want as a team. You know, certain teams, I remember watching a team in South America, for instance, this week, and they picked Witch Doctor like 3 times in a row because they just like that as their 5. I think Keeping the Light is something that as the patch goes on, I think we will see more and more teams pick up, especially when we see like CIS especially, like if they haven't liked it so far, they might see other regions picking it, or they've seen Seneko play it and they've been like, okay, maybe we could, you know, start to pick up on that and do that as well. Because we know that CIS like to play this high tempo Dota a lot of the time, and having that recall ability allows you to play, you know, with numbers advantage in fights and split push. So I expect it to be picked up more coming into week 2.
And talking a little bit about the CIS meta, you mentioned you've watched pretty much all the regions to some degree. Is there any particular picks from CIS that we're seeing in CIS but nowhere else, or the reverse?
Dan, you can't at me like that. I've got too much spare time. Okay, but I don't think there's been anything too crazy. They've liked their OD, I think, more than other regions. But
that's been a China-focused pick as well, though, to be fair.
Yeah, it's been across a lot of regions, but I think some regions, like I think EU, hasn't like picked it up and banned it a huge amount, like in comparison to like China and stuff as well, like you say. In the lower division, which I'll quickly mention, we've seen some Naga Disruptor, which has been really interesting. Because I think there was one game in SEA or China that it got picked in as well. But it was interesting to me to see these different teams in the lower division in CIS starting to pick up like this Naga Disruptor again. Because it's a strong combo when it can be played well.
Let's go into that lower division then, because lower division to me, I've not watched any of the CIS lower division, my card's on the table. But from the match scores, it looks to be much more competitive. Is that the case? Have you been able to pick up much of that?
It has been more competitive. I watched most of the games. I haven't watched all of them. But the one that stands out to me is the team that's played twice, that's won both of them, is Hellraisers. But the series that they won weren't clean. For a team that consists of players that were vying to try and get into Division 1, they played against, I think it was Imperial Pro Gaming and a team that I can't pronounce. Let me find it. Hang on.
They were against VP Prodigy, weren't they?
They were against VP Prodigy as well. Was it? Yeah, it was Imperial Pro Gaming and VP Prodigy. So VP Prodigy looked good, but when you're a team that's trying to push into that Division 1, the fact that you drop a game in both series, I think was a little bit rough around the edges almost. You know, they've got the win. That's the most important thing. They're 2-0 after the first week, but they'll be looking to improve because it wasn't clean.
There may be people who are tuning into this who are curious about how Dendy's getting up to with his new team of South Americans. B8 won their first series, which I think is an improvement. How have they been doing?
It was pretty wild, that series. I remember watching it live at the time, and all the games lasted about the same amount. I think it was like 50 to 58 minutes or something, all three were. And it was their standard almost like 4 protect 1 that they love to do, where who's the carry player? RDO, the guy that's one of the guys that's come from Brazil. It was like loving his like Terror Blades and things, and like these really late game carries, and they pushed through and they won their first series eventually, but it was close. So a good win to start with, but definitely not easy.
Fair enough. Okay, let's move on to next week and what we can expect to see coming up in the upper division. So on January 28th, we've got Extremian versus Team Unique. 29th, we've got the first of those top 4 clashes, VP versus Live to Win, and Empire versus Team Spirit. And on January 31st, we've got Na'Vi versus Extremium and Team Spirit against No Techies. Would your pick of those matches be VP versus Live to Win?
I've got 2 though.
Okay.
Because I think there's 2 different series of 2 very different reasons. One of them is VP versus Live to Win, because it's the first showdown we've had between these top 4 teams. And like we've said, this 1 to 4 positioning in the group stage will come down to these head-to-head records from the top 4 teams. So that's the first important one. Number 2, for the other end of the group, is the first series that you mentioned, which is Extreme versus Unique.
Okay.
If either of these teams, whichever team loses that series, I'd be very surprised if they didn't get relegated to Division 2.
Okay.
Because I think that's the kind of series that once you go 0-2 and you lose to another team that's kind of like vying for that relegation almost, I think they need to really step it up if they're going to survive after that series. So if you're worried about the bottom of the group, that's the series to watch. If you're worried about the top of the group, VP versus Live to Win's your series.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll leave it there then. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Brilliant. Thank you to Mo Farah for taking us through CIS, an exciting region, certainly, one that I've not managed to watch much of, but I was interested to hear his take on everything going on there. We, however, are going to be moving on straight away to China, where Kips is going to be taking us through proceedings there. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through your first impressions of the first week of China Dota.
Yeah, so the first week of China Dota has been interesting in that at first everything looked really stable and smooth. I saw all of the things that I expected to see from China, like, OD, but also a very clear hierarchy between the teams. Like the invited teams were all beating the teams that had gone through the Divider tournament. The Divider teams were all beating the teams that had gone through the Opens. And then the last day, suddenly everything went haywire. And we're just coming fresh off of that. So if I'm too enthusiastic about that, please rein me in.
Yes, let's talk about that last day. So that's Sunday, the 24th of January. We had two matches there, Elephant versus IG, which finished 2-1 to IG, and PSG, LGD versus Asta, that finished 2-1 to Asta. Let's talk a little bit about those games. What were your impressions of them?
Yeah, so first off, IG was really not supposed to beat Elephant whatsoever. Elephant are the big dogs in the league, right? And IG, they barely scraped by through the decider tournament. They've had a lot of player switches recently as well. And Emo hadn't really been looking like the hot stuff that he normally was. And this series, I think it partially was the draft, but next to that, IG just showed up as a team. And after a pretty smooth game 1 for Elephant, game 2 and 3 were actually very decisively IG flavored. And that was a really big upset. Nobody would have even thought them capable of upsetting the top dogs. And this is literally the expected bottom team beating the top team. But it wasn't spectacular. It was just one smooth win into 2 smooth other wins, even if those were unexpected. And well, the second series that we just watched.
Before we go on to that one, let's just have a brief discussion about Elephant IG. From what I got from the stream, the sense was that IG had won all 3 of those games in the draft, and the game that Elephant won was won through superior play style. Is that something that you agree with?
Not entirely. I mean, it was a pretty greedy draft. Support Brewmaster, I believe, support Puck as well. But there wasn't actually enough lane pressure out from IG to really capitalize on that. And if you let that draft through the lanes, that as soon as that draft hits level 6, you actually have 2 extremely competent team fighters over on just the supports of your enemy alone. So, no, I don't really agree with that being a draft win for IG.
Fair enough. Do you think that the other 2 games were a draft win for IG, or do you think they performed well enough to win with a poorer draft even?
No, definitely not a poorer draft though. I'd have to take my notes to see it again exactly, but especially the game where they forced Elephant into a drow was a pretty clear draft win. That is the second map, I believe. Yeah. Because they ended up with a very low team fight kind of lineup, and they had to protect the Drow Ranger without really the tools. They had a Beastmaster, they had a Bounty Hunter, which is the pick where I'm like, that's where Elephant really made the draft hard for themselves. And they got picked into a situation where there's a Morphling last pick, and you can't pick any of the other traditional hard carries into it. Most of them have been banned. And the Troll Warlord would have been really nice for you, but he doesn't beat Morph, so Drow is the only thing left on the table.
Do you think that perhaps those drafts that are so dependent on individual skill and so dependent on big players, on their favourite heroes, is that an element of arrogance from Elephant and they need to tighten up a little bit? And perhaps the coaching of IG has helped them into that.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not sure if I want to call it arrogance, but it's definitely a bit carefree. Like a Bounty Hunter on pick 3 is, unless you're really sure that you have all of the tools you need to snowball those mid-game team fights, then you're risking, well, the exact scenario that they got pushed into, where you can't actually outplay your way out of just having all of the lesser tools at your disposal. So since this is like the first real match they played in this league, I don't want to call it arrogance just yet. Arrogance is if they do it again.
Fair enough. Earlier when we were talking over Discord, you mentioned that the Somnus Puck in game 1 was pretty incredible, and I did watch that game, and it was pretty great. And obviously Somnus is an incredible player, and it's always great to highlight him, but are there particular players in IG who you felt performed higher than expectations there?
On IG, I guess I already sort of mentioned Emo, who actually went to a 0-death Morphling game in that series, in the Drow game actually as well. And that man, he's really hit or miss, but he is such a technical player, and he just hit all of those buttons right that game, and that was really very satisfying to watch.
Great. Let's talk about the game that I think a lot of people will have heard about from this week of Chinese Dota, the one that just finished seconds before we got onto this call. PSG LGD versus Asta. What were your impressions of that mammoth series?
Honestly, I didn't expect it to go to Mammoth Series. Let's be clear first. Aster looked really very good in the Decider tournament. They definitely looked the best out of everyone that wasn't directly invited. But with how dominant, the division had been up until that point, it was very clear, as I said right at the start, that the invited teams were beating the teams from Decider, etc. So it's like, maybe they take a game off of them.
Mm-hmm.
And in game one, it actually didn't really look like that. It's already all blurred together. I'm just going to grab a Dota buffer actually to help my memory, because game 3 just, you know how it feels when it wipes your entire memory and all you can remember is that last game.
Yes, yeah, very much so. The first of that
Very
series
much
feels
so.
an age away by this point.
It does. So that first game was, I'm not a really big fan of Ricky, and neither am I of the AA pick that China seems to value really highly, actually. But they had some pretty good matchups here. What surprised me was that LGD went for a mid Rubik pretty much unprompted. There's not any force into running the mid Rubik there, apart from the fact that they really wanted the AA versus the Wraith King and the Abaddon, which against the Abaddon, I understand, but versus the Wraith King, it's a bit, yeah, sure, you blast him once, but then he just comes back. He's not just a lifesteal carry.
Let's talk about that AA a bit, because that's a pick that's been picked up quite a lot in China, but I've not necessarily noticed it so much in other regions. Do you think that's a China-specific pick, or am I just misremembering the other regions?
No, it's absolutely a China-specific pick. I've been trying to follow games here and there, and it's the only time I've seen it in other regions is when it's literally a counter pick to very classic like Alchemist or Wisp. And I asked around a bit to actually some analysts to the other regions, because I just couldn't quite get my brain on why exactly China was banning this in the first phase, right from the get-go. So before we'd even seen any officials, they must have been scrimming with this. And I do agree with some of the knowledge that got transfused back into me. It's just so, for example, Monkey King, right? Wraith King, very popular right now. Alchemist, Morph, all these heroes really rely on their ability to lifesteal their way back in, especially Monkey King, who is big in every single region right now. And with an AA pick, you sort of preempt all of that, and you ask people, all right, do you want to play into this AA, or do you want to, look outside the pool of available heroes? And you can actually see that in game 2 of this series, where you get Aster picking a Naga Siren, which is completely out of that pool of the hot carries right now, and she falls flat on her face.
Fair enough. Let's go into that final game before this section becomes as long as that game. That game was 88 minutes in length, a total of 6 rapiers, I believe, in it. In a game like that, what do you focus on? Because obviously the mid-game almost becomes, it is obviously relevant when you're looking at the flow of how you get to the late game, but the late game itself is so different to any other part of a Dota game.
It's wild.
What do you feel wins a game like that?
So apart from landing a couple of your really key spells, and you could see that Aster had trouble with this. They whiffed several RPs when they had the superior team fight if they landed the RP, but without it, they definitely did not, because they had both a huge Morphling and a huge Ricky to bring down. And without a good RP, they couldn't ever deal with either before all of their backline was dead. So that was one of the reasons why the game lasted as long as it did. But then in the end as well, you can see as all of the itemizations, everyone's slots fill up, everyone's abilities fill up, it really comes down to the understanding of, okay, what do you need to end the game? And LGD, of course, Aster had mega creeped their opponents. So they were in the position to try out different things to end the game. So you could see them, for example, smoking into the base and trying to go for the backdoor play. Which sadly didn't work out, but it showed very clearly to me that these guys were not afraid of, big bad LGD. They were ready to get in there. And during all of these attempts, they discovered that the Monkey King actually just simply couldn't really die. I don't know if you clicked on him at any point during that game, but if he was in his ultimate, he had 93% physical damage resistance. Wow. So Ricky could keep on buying rapiers, but they were never, ever going to kill that Monkey King. And in the end, when Aster really started realizing that and put that Monkey King forward again and again, the buybacks on the side of LGD ran out,
It's a shame.
and their ancient eventually fell.
Okay, well, I think if would that be your highlight of the game of the week? That
Yeah.
third game.
Absolutely, just watch that one. Great use of Wind Wakers, by the way. One of the first times that I've seen that item really
very
used
great.
to the max in Pro Dota.
If you're short on time, I think you can probably start at around 60 minutes, and you'll be fine to catch most of the exciting parts of that game.
Agreed.
Is there anything else from the region this week that you want to highlight or talk about?
Let me check my notes here. It's one of the things that I guess just hero-wise, China isn't that different from the rest of the world right now, apart from maybe the AA. And they also seem to have this weird thing going on, and I think more regions have this, where some games they value the OD extremely highly. I think it's super powerful right now. And then other games, they completely ignore it. And I'm not sure yet what causes this, but I imagine that there's a lot more OD in our future. Was a post 4 OD today as well, by the way. Interesting stuff.
That is interesting, yeah. As we look into those other smaller teams, so the teams that people may not know so much, LBZS and Magma, that played twice this week, LBZS, do you think they had a poor showing this week? Obviously going 4-0 at the start of the thing is bad. Is there any potential there?
There's absolutely potential there, especially LBZS really showed every single time that straight out of the laning stage, they came to play. They're incredibly aggressive. I think I've talked about Catyu so much in the previous podcast as well, but I got to stop talking about that guy, because that man, you pick him Earth Spirit and he goes in. He does not look over his shoulder. Absolute disregard for his own life. And they got pretty close, especially against Vici, where eventually they just roll out of steam and the more experienced teams push them back over. But I think that if they can manage to keep this up, they are going to start taking games off of the bigger teams. I have no doubt.
Great. Let's close up by looking at next week, what's coming up. We've got a number of high-profile games in the Week 2 Upper Division. We've got VG versus Magma on the 26th of January, and then Elephant versus Aster. So hope that can go a similar distance. On the 29th, we've got Elephant versus LBZS. And on the 31st, we've got eHome versus IG. It'll be the first showing of the eHome so far. And PSG LGD versus Magma. Is there any particular highlights there that you'd pick out?
I mean, normally I would have said, oh, well, I want to see eHome versus IG, because that's probably a very close matchup. But after seeing Aster's performance, actually, I want to see what they can do to Elephant. Because Elephant looked a little bit carefree. Aster looked extremely focused and ready to take down the Giants. I think that could be a very interesting clash of sort of team personalities there. So I'm going to be there for that one.
Great. Well, I hope it lives up to expectations, but we'll watch that next week, and I'll see you after that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Whoa there, that was a lot to take in from China, but Kips, I think, did a great job of summarizing it all down, and I hope everybody now is well up to date on China. But we, however, are going to be zooming straight away to Europe, where T-Governor is going to take us through proceedings. Eagle-eyed viewers on the video version of this show may notice that I incorrectly name him in the labeling as 1437 and incorrectly name the region in the labeling as South America, and then fix it on the fly like I'm Gromit or something. So sorry about that. If you're so confused your head explodes, it was entirely my fault. But anyway, we are going to be continuing on straight away to T-Governor's perfect on-point analysis of Europe. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through your initial impressions of the first week of EU.
Well, it's great, you know. Got DPC Dota, mate. That's the key thing. I'm happy we got the Dota back. I think we got the 4 top teams in EU are still holding down that name. You know, Nigma, OG, Secret, Liquid. And I think the other 4 teams who are trying to, rival those are trying their best. I think the standout team was probably High Coast Esports, previously known as Chicken Fighters. They were probably the most enjoyable kind of team to watch, and then Alliance just below that. So yeah, it's been a crazy week of EU Dota for sure.
So let's jump straight into the matches. Is there any particular match you'd like to highlight just as a starting point?
I guess we could start with the match that people wouldn't really expect to be the highlight, and that's going to be the Liquid Viking series for me. Simply because I think Viking, after how well they did in the previous year, them coming into that new year and kind of what could they bring to the table, they were kind of outclassed by Liquid. A quick 2-0, And Liquid, they didn't really reveal much in their draft, where it was the CM Puck opening, and then they had this kind of lone druid on the 4th pick in both games, and it was game 1, 27 minutes 13, game 2, 27 minutes 18. So I think Liquid just really had the strategy in that series, and we didn't really get to see anything from Viking because they just were outclassed. So I think I want to see more from them coming into the future weeks, because I hope this is not what Viking has to offer.
Do you think that's perhaps a little bit of naivety from Viking to not ban the lone druid? To me, 2 games in a row seems naive at best.
It's a combination of, I think, the puck in the first phase, and obviously the lone druid in the second phase. But when you look at Vikings drafts, in the first game they had some like Io, Monkey, Shaman, Lycan, Void Spirit. It was like a really, like, I say these heroes in a combination, it doesn't feel right. I feel like a lot of people would kind of question this kind of combination. And in the second game, they kind of touched on what they utilized in their open qualifiers. They had this bounty hunter. They're trying to run a bit more aggression with this Beastmaster offlane as well. But again, it fell flat. They didn't really have the substance to deal with like the beauty of Liquid's. Like Liquid's draft in both of these games, you look at it and just go, damn, what a beautiful draft. And yeah, so I really hope Viking kind of steer away from kind of what the pub meta is kind of dictating right now, and they start to try and develop some kind of team strategies, because it does feel very much like they've aligned themselves to, this is what's good in pubs, let's just try and play as a team and see if it works. And Liquid, on the other hand, they've got these like team strategies, and they demolished with it, especially in the opening game of the DPC. This was the first game of the DPC EU, and it was, very one-sided, unfortunately.
This give you a little bit of a bellwether to where Liquid might be, because we spoke last time, I think, about Liquid needing to be a team who are in the game very much. So they need to be a team who are motivated. Did this give you a sense that they are a team who are motivated?
Yeah, for sure. I think motivation for all these teams will be equal. You know, they're all going to be very hungry, especially when you have, I think it's like top 4 of EU go to the major, be it the playoffs, group stage, or wildcards. I think motivation for sure is there. But I think for Liquid, it's just finding their grounding. Like, what is their kind of bread and butter of their draft? And I think especially with like this puck hero being pretty good right now, and their ability to play, for example, DK in multiple roles, I think they are going to be very strong within the drafts. And they showed it, especially against Viking, they're very good. Against Nigma, kind of touching on that series a little bit, it was a very close series, very back and forth, and especially the first 2 games, it was really enjoyable to watch. Game 3, on the other hand, kind of felt like their draft was on a big timer. But yeah, I think Liquid for sure, they are, again, easily kind of claimed their top 4 spot. I think this was the one team in EU that could have easily gone from like top 4 maybe into like 5th, 6th. But I think after the opening kind of 2 series, they have proven that they know what they need to do in this current meta, and they should be fine securing that top 4 for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to follow on from that to look at the second series that Liquid were involved in, the 2-1 against Nigma, which they lost. Is that then an indication that maybe that they aren't the toppest team here, or was that a quite a close series in your estimation?
It was a very close series, because I think when you look at the 2 teams, you don't really know what Nigma's going to do, right? Like, you got Kuroki playing this position 5 Void Spirit, you got Bloodseeker in all 3 games of the 3-game series, and like, it's kind of, Nigma's drafts are just kind of random heroes that you don't really expect to be picked in that order, but then it works well, and then they just like outplay you, or like Weez being super active. I think the key thing is for Nigma especially, they're a team that Weehart often will sacrifice his own game to try and enable the others, and it can easily turn into, haha, why is we in Team Nigma? You know, they're losing so much. You know, he's not in 12. But in reality, it's like the games where he's doing that, like he's opening up the game for others. Sometimes it is just feet, but like 9 times out of 10, there's a reason behind it. And like, I think, especially in this Nigma Liquid series, he proved that his active nature really dismantled the kind of the rigid nature of Liquid, because him alone was just opening up this game for the rest of his team. And the flip side to that, when I speak about Nigma's drafts being very open, like just load up the Dota buff and you see for yourselves. It's very, very enjoyable to see. You look at Liquid, and they've kind of got like this regimented style of drafting. It's really good draft. Like, you look at, you can't really fault it, but there's always going to be that 1 or 2 hero that if you really think about what their draft's trying to execute, there will be that counter. And just kind of the brain power of Nigma, they were able to kind of find those counters and just go, you know what, we'll go for this Medusa, we'll go for this PL. Like, pick 18 was the key thing in Nigma's game 2 and game 3 win for me, because like, you see these opening heroes from Liquid, and they are really scary, but there's just that one carry pick that dismantles it completely. And I think, unfortunately for Liquid, they weren't able to own the early game well enough to then kind of get to the point where they win, because the outscaling of Nigma and the space creation of Weeha then eventually won them that series for Nigma especially.
Was that the same story against Alliance for Team Nigma, the space creation of Weeha, and is it a similar story?
It's my easy to go to answer for Mr. Weeha, I think. I think that series for me, I think it was less about Nigma. Again, their drafts were very creative. I think the first game was a little bit wild, so to speak. They had a Puck IO Pugna Troll out. It was a bit Wild West, this offlane out last pick. It was, I don't know. That it still causes a little bit of confusion to me today. But no, that series for me is simply Alliance and their desire to pick this 23 pick Wraith King nonstop, and it did prove successful in game one, but against these like TI level amazing teams, they're going to have an ability to kind of learn from their mistakes, right? And I think Nigma game one, they pick up this quirky draft. They have a couple moments of beauty, a couple active plays. And Alliance, they have this, they just walk the park. Timber, Fury, and they're just so hard to kill. With early game, they might struggle maybe a little bit, but then suddenly this mid game tankiness, they eventually just win it quite easily. But again, looking at the fact that Alliance was so stubborn with their drafts, I think in game 2 and 3, whilst Nigma were kind of changing up the little pieces of the puzzle that were going wrong, that's kind of what allowed Nigma just to walk this series, in my opinion, because they just were a bit more creative. But sure, game 3 100% was very close, could easily gone either way, but I think, it's the creativity from Nigma is what's sparking that, especially with that Slark mid against the Batrider. That was the key thing for me, yeah.
Do you think stubbornness is a long-term Alliance problem? Because it often feels like, I think S4 is a great drafter and I think he's a really good captain, but it does sometimes feel like he can get a bit stuck in a particular way of playing or in a particular way of doing things. Like, for example, he always does those big mass buybacks, which are always not necessarily the best idea, but it's an S4 thing to do. Would you agree that sometimes they're a little stubborn?
It depends where it's coming from, right? Because it's easy to blame the drafter, but depending on the team dynamic, it could easily be, for example, Nika Baby. He's not confident in his hero pool, where he might only, like, on pick 23 when it's his hero and there's still one counter pick to come into play, he might be like, I just want my Wraith King. Just give me my Wraith King, And like, when you look at the heroes he's picking into, like Troll, Bloodseeker, Slark, these are like the big cores he's picking into. It is an okay Wraith King pick for sure, but it's just like, was there a better pick potentially? And I don't know, but for sure, I think Alliance and Liquid kind of have the same thing, right? In terms of their draft. When you say stubbornness, they are stubborn because their drafts are very good at like destroying teams. The problem is when they get found out, there can be some weaknesses with flexibility of moving the draft slightly to kind of shift with the meta. And right now for Alliance, it's early days, so I'm not going to fault them too much. But if we move into like week 3, week 4, and we still keep seeing the same things, and they're suddenly losing more series and they're not really finding that momentum, then they'll find issues. And I think that's the difference between, for example, an Alliance and a Liquid, where they're kind of the same type of drafters. Liquid does slowly adapt over time, and Alliance kind of does fall into that kind of repetition. And hopefully they do break that. And yeah, we'll see.
Let's just close up on the matches with High Coast Esports versus OG. I watched that one. That was a really interesting game. I thought. I think High Coast Esports looked a lot better than we might have expected them to. What was your take on that series?
I think everyone was watching OG when they tried to do the wombo combo of the Naga in the top lane, if everyone remembers. Again, I don't know if you got a clip for that, but if you do, please, boom, present that. The song, the cataclysm, everything, and they missed everything. But no, I think it just proves that these teams are pretty close in EU, especially when you have High Coast Esports. Again, previously Chicken Fighters, they come into this series, and I'll hand on heart, I'll say OG would have 2-0'd this. I thought it would be not like extremely one-sided, but I think OG should have taken it with confidence. But the fact that they were able to come out swinging, were able to take a strong victory and at least take it to a 2-1, it does prove pretty well. And if you look at like Chessie's Twitter, he's talking about like this game 3, that draft they had, High Coast Esports.
High Coast Esports, they're very insistent.
This was
on
like,
brand.
Thank you. This was like their bread and butter. Like this was their open qualifiers. The Mars, the Sky, SD. These 3 heroes, they demolished a lot of teams. The team that I'm coaching, they demolished that team too with this combo. It was very strong. Like I don't want to say that they beat us, but like they beat us. But anyways, like they were very good with this. And I think Chessie, he personally he reflected on himself being the big issue in his team not being able to win that game. There was a couple kind of misplays coming out from him, a couple missed spears. But again, like the type of draft that they have there, it's you hit the spells, you kill them because you have the Mars, the Puck, the Sky. It's very explosive. If you miss one spell and you have that big cooldown, suddenly against OG, the Morph, the Earth Split, the Ricky, what are they waiting for? What are their timings? They don't care. So it's very much high pressure draft from High Coast to the staple of OG. And the fact that the game was arguably that close, I still think it's props to them, but it is I don't know. It looks good for High Coast for sure. The fact they took OG to a 2-1 and at least Chesty knows, or at least they know kind of where to reflect on, where to improve on. But yeah,
they
that was
have
a good
two
series.
players who are new to their positions in Zibe's
that's true.
not played 5 for a while, and Chesty's I think never played 3 as far as I'm aware. Do you think they're a team that have potential to grow then? It's a pretty encouraging start if you're looking at them as a team with potential.
Yeah, I think for sure. Like when you look at Chesty as a mid laner before, the crossover of heroes does kind of sit there, right? Like he loved playing Brew, he loved playing Mars, he loves playing Kunkka. I think they might in the future they might be trying that. Of course, they haven't tried it yet, but like the idea of Chesty's hero pool, there is a lot of crossover. So I think for sure his role change will be pretty normal. I think Zibe as well, he has played 5 in previous time, obviously in pubs as well. So for their role swaps, I think this is the one team where role swaps actually kind of go, sure, cool, continue playing. It's not like you got no one moving to offlane, or like Misery moving from 5 to offlane to, like you haven't got this kind of like weird situation occurring. So for High Coast, they easily can grow very quickly. I think I always rated Charlie within NIP. I think he often was the guy who was carrying them. If he didn't have a game, they would struggle a lot. So I really hope that with this kind of new combination, this maybe new captaining style, even the organization pushing them, I think hopefully they can find some substance. But they very much will be fighting for, I feel like that 5th place spot at best. And maybe in the second season, that's when they can look to push forward because they're a team that came through the open qualifiers. They recently formed for that qualifier. So if they can even survive the first season of DPC Europe #1, then I think that alone proves that they can really push forward in the future seasons. But for now, I think they can't get too carried away and they expect to get to the major because they are fighting up against the OGs, the Secrets, the Enigmas, the Liquids. It's very, very hard.
Let's close up with a brief look at the meta of EU. Are there picks or playstyles that you're seeing in EU that you're not seeing anywhere else? Or is EU a bit of a template for everywhere else?
Well, EU is the best region, of course. We don't have to watch the other... No, I think for now in EU, we're looking very much at the very bog standard meta of, the Nyx, the Coddle, the Puck, the Bat Rider. And it's kind of, I won't lie, a bit boring. I've had a little dip into the China region, and they're getting a bit more creative with some of their picks and how to counter these meta heroes. So I think for now, EU's in that stage where there hasn't been enough tier 1 Dota because of how DPC is structured to accelerate the meta. And hopefully the teams during the downtime, they are looking at these other regions to find out what's happening because they can use that resource to keep pushing forward. Because right now we don't really have that push of creativity. And I think the main teams that are doing that for sure is the Enigmas, is going to be those OGs. Obviously, they had this Omni Knight mid from Topson. Yeah, exactly. This double carry kind of setup. And obviously Enigma, they've got these DPs, Void Spirits, Bloodseekers, everything's kind of going all around the place with them as well. So I think just the structure alone of DPC, the lack of volume of games will be a hindrance towards maybe pushing the meta quickly. But hopefully they do look at the other regions for sure because they're being creative and we're a little bit more stuck towards our ban Nyx. If Nyx not banned, pick Nyx. If Nyx not banned, pick Core, we need more flair across all the teams.
Fair enough. Let's close up then by looking at the matches for next week. We've got a good range of matches next week. On the 26th of January, we've got Team Liquid versus High Coast Esports and OG versus Mud Golems. Then High Coast Esports playing their second game against Mud Golems. Viking GG against Team Secret, which is traditionally a pretty great matchup. And Alliance versus OG, the same on the 30th of January. Is there any one game there that you'd pick out above all others that people have to catch?
I think the important one for sure is, especially if you're a Viking fan, has to be that Viking Secret series because starting 0-2 in the groups will always be very rough. And I think Secret is the team that they looked not shaky, but it wasn't like the secret everyone happily looks at and goes, wow, they're world class, right? They did get they win 2-1 against Mughalum. So I think Viking have a lot to prove, and Secret, they only want excellence and 100%, and they didn't have that going into the Mughalum series. So I think that's a big battle of two teams really trying to prove themselves for sure. But I think the key proving one as well is also going to be that first series of the week. Liquid, the High Coast Esports. Liquid, they're sitting 1-1 in the group, and High Coast Esports, they nearly beat OG, and I think they're very hungry to prove. And I think Liquid's the team that is that gateway into that top 4. So if they can get a quick early victory against Liquid, and suddenly Liquid's 1-2, High Coast 1-1, like that's a very, very close series in my opinion. So yeah, I think January 26th, Liquid High Coast Esports, that's a one to watch, and January 30th, Viking GG and Secret, that's another one.
Great. Okay, we'll check out those then. And there's also, of course, Hellbear Smashers versus M4P towards the end of the week, which is...
Wait, who are we playing, mate? Hold on, let's have a little look.
M4P, whoever.
Wow, that's a very good team. Let's have a look. Who's on their roster? Low skill. Oh yeah, these lads actually did do some work in the qualifiers. That's actually going to be a pretty fun series, I think. Man, this lower division, like, you don't know these players, these stats, and then suddenly they're actually like, oh wow, they're actually pretty good, because us tier 2, tier 3 teams, we're all equally as bad as each other, right? So yeah, we're gonna respect this Metaphor Pro. This will be a good one.
Okay, we'll look it out for that then. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next week. Okay, so just to start, talk me through what you see, I suppose, as the highlights of this week of the NADPC.
All right. Week 1 of the North American DPC, we had some amazing games. Highlights is EG is back. We got to witness 2 games. The first one, EG versus 4Zoomers, something a lot of people were waiting for. That match between the two of them, I'd say it went pretty good for them. A great initial showing, but bad for 4Zoomers. Overall in the league, I think EG is going to get stronger and stronger as we go along, just due to the fact they're a little bit out of practice. They just got to their boot camp and playing against each other. If 4Zoomers were going to beat them at any point, it would have been week number 1. So unlucky for them to have that one. No. Sad Boys versus EG, game that was just played today on the 24th as we're recording this one. A hell of a match, and I got to say I'm a little bit surprised. Sad Boys ended up knocking game number 1 off of EG. Not something I think many people were expecting, but we got to see giants on both sides duking it out in North America. That's something we haven't had for a pretty long time.
It seemed to me in both those EG drafts, both those EG series, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it felt a lot like the games that EG lost were due to slight instability on the draft, slightly weaker draft, and then they kind of reined it in for the other games. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would, and I would even say the game they played against 4Zoomers, they almost came back and won that one. Ended up going to 60 minutes. That was game number 2 of that series. It was 4Zoomers' game to lose, basically, and they almost did. If you haven't had the chance, I highly recommend checking that game out. Some incredible plays there on Sammy Boy's Ricky and Arteezy going double rapier on Wraith King.
That's the infamous TP out moment that
yes
wasn't actually that impressive, but everyone seemed to think it was incredible. So were they your highlights of the week, the EG games? Are there any other particular highlights you'd like to pull out?
I want to talk about Team Undying very quickly up against the A team. Those were the 2 fastest series so far in this tournament. I believe one of the games was GG'd out by A team in only 17 minutes for the upper division match, and the other one in 22. Incredibly quick 2-0 by Undying. This is a major team to look out for. Coming through the open qualifiers, even, not a directly invited team. Incredibly scary. Has superstars that we talked about last week. Is somebody that you want to be catching every single one of their matches. If you didn't get the chance to see how they ripped apart A-Team last time, I highly recommend you do.
So talk me through that ripping apart then, because I remember watching Tomato and that, and he seemed very impressive to me. I think Saberlight is looking like he's beginning to come good on his promise. Are there any other highlights you'd talk about?
They ran a bounty hunter, which is something you don't see very often these days. He was changed around recently with his Aghanim Shard, his track going back to how it used to be once he picks that one up. But incredibly fast-paced lineup, and I guess they just played non-stop. It's like you'd see a tier 1 team out of Europe or out of China, just methodical Dota, point A to point B, wasting no time with any of their movements. Moon I think is an excellent captain. He plays very quick, and the rest of the team is following suit.
So do you think they're going to be a very stable team then, a team where we can expect good mechanical Dota? Are they perhaps not? Because looking at that team now, before this all kicked off, I might have thought there'd be a bit of a wild card, maybe a little bit unpredictable, do some crazy things. From my knowledge of those players, are you saying they're a stable, secret-esque kind of good team methodologically?
I do. I've got the chance to talk to their manager a couple of times, and unfortunately, he's not leaking anything to me, the rascal. But they've been scrimming nonstop. They've been taking things very seriously. They've been doing tons of prep work for every team that they play against, very far in advance. And from how he's been describing it, despite the fact that he's not leaking any scrim data, they sound incredibly strong, just with how seriously they're taking all of this.
Okay, let's dive back a little bit into EG and kind of the key players there that people might be interested in. Obviously, Ice moving to that team was a big story for a lot of people in the region. Ice being a proper legend of the game. How do you think he's settled into these opening matches?
I think that he's not really getting to play exactly how he wants. It feels like when they're drafting for Ice, they don't have him being a superstar player. They have him playing these consistent, steady offlaners, kind of like you'd see Seb on out of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be the easiest comparison for me to draw. And I don't really feel as if that's style. He needs something that he can shine on. I mean, he's an amazing mechanical player. You got to give him something that he can pop off with. And I think that's one of the reasons why EG, rather than getting these 2-0s against Sad Boys and against 4 Zoomers, they've gotten the 1-2s, or the 2-1s.
But these are players who haven't played competitively since almost June, I would say, for the most part. Did you sense an element of rustiness in their play? Do you think they are back to it like ducks to water, or are they going to get stronger and stronger?
I think they'll continue to get stronger. They will end up reaching their peak before a couple of these other teams. They do have the advantage of being all together at a boot camp right now. I believe it is on the East Coast of the United States.
Is Crit with them, or I think he's in Europe, is he?
I think he's in Europe. There's at least 3 players there. This is just through word of mouth. I was told that Arteezy and several other people had flown down there.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Canada, I think Toronto, prior to that. He had just taken off. So that one I do know. But again, I see them kind of shaking off the rust, getting back into it, because last time they played Evil Geniuses, that was Omega League, and they were playing in Europe Division,
which would have been around September. Any other key picks hero picks you've seen from these teams coming up? EG Star, anything else we can expect from them going forward?
It's hard to say. They mix things up a bit. It's EG, I think, shake things up depending on how good or bad they're doing with their drafts. They seem to have several different styles of doing it. I know Balba drafts for them sometime, but the rest of the time, I think everybody chirps in and mixes things up. Consistently, they pick what's strong inside the meta, and they don't really have these specialty things, so to speak, anymore, at least in my opinion. Though we haven't seen them in months and months. Odds are they have tons of things in the bag that they still need to pull out here.
I'd like to talk a little bit about Sad Boys as a roster. Obviously, they're a roster that many people will be quite excited about. There's a lot of legends in that team. They lost 2-1 against EG. We already discussed that. Perhaps that was a little rustiness from EG. Do you think there's a strength in the team that could see them surpass your initial expectations?
Absolutely. I was a little bit surprised to see them lose game number 2 today against EG, where they ended up hitting them with the Broodmother. But I think EG just picking things up, realizing, all right, we need to go all out for this game. We can't really afford to get Brooded Hero lose in the first initial week. I was very surprised to see Sad Boys win game number 1, because to me, it looked like Sad Boys weren't taking this super seriously. Back in BTS Pro Series 4, I felt like they were one of the weaker teams inside the tournament, and they got stronger as it went along, which gave me the impression that they weren't really scrimming together. This time, it seems that they were very well practiced and well prepared to deal with Evil Geniuses.
DNM is the player that a lot of people will be unfamiliar with. Do you know him quite well? How did you feel he did today?
He did excellent today. He definitely left his mark. He was on killing sprees multiple games in a row. And you have to keep in mind he's playing against giants on Quincy Crew. Everybody is an international tier player, and this is, I guess, his second debut tournament after BTS Pro Series 4. The guy he's playing with Giants on his team against Giants, and he is measuring up. I'm super impressed with him, and I got the chance to talk to you a little bit about him last week. The integrity of them, despite being such a young player, is absolutely incredible. I think he definitely deserves this opportunity that he's been given.
Let's close up on upper division by chatting a little bit about Quincy Crew. They've been they were your pick for the top of the region. I remember from last week. How did you feel about their slight dismantling of Five Man Midas just 20 minutes ago?
It's not much of a surprise. I was a little bit surprised to see Quincy Crew go for the draw lineup. That was something they struggled with in the past when I was watching them in BTS Pro Series 3, I believe it was. They actually lost one game against Beast Coast. I think one of the only games inside the group states that they dropped was when they ran the Draw Ranger lineup. But they've managed to iron out the kinks on that one. I guess solve some of their errors. One of the biggest things was the fact they didn't really have an off carry. Quinn was playing a hero that fell off in the mid lane that game. I forget the exact details of it, as it was several months ago. But the Draw Ranger couldn't carry by himself at that point. This time around, they ended both games incredibly quickly. Not quite as fast as Undying in their matches against A-Team, but still very impressive.
It's good to hear. Are there any particular plays or highlights that you think people should check out? We're not going to be able to show them now, but just as a moment, kind of big plays that are exciting for you.
It's going to have to be the Four Zoomers versus Evil Genius. It's probably game number 2. There were some throwy moments there by Four Zoomers, don't get me wrong, but game 2 was a real treat to watch with how far it went back and forth. Definitely my highlight of this week for the upper division.
Okay, great. I wanted to talk a little bit about, it wouldn't be NA if there was a touch of drama and a touch of rivalry in the region. I think even more so than many other regions. Is there anything this week that's piqued your dramatic eye?
Absolutely. It's going to have to be out of lower division. Dog Champ, Lukey, and Arkosh not having a very good time. And this is some things that we see in all chat. There's other things we see in the lobby between the games that I've had the privilege of catching. A bit of trash talk back and forth. I think Dog Champ not having such a good time and not exactly happy with their roster. They're one of the teams that I believe want to switch some players around, but Valve has been very strict with the rules. This week, they did have for game number 2, Fade was replaced with Ritsu, who was playing as a stand-in. All teams allowed a limit of 4 series stand-ins, and only one of their players can be swapped out.
So they're swapping players out. Is that a serious move? Are they really trying to do a roster change here, kind of sneaky roster change?
To do it the first week is a bit of a bold move, and some teams in various regions have been rallying up to try and replace or advocate for being able to replace players partway through the season. That might be the goal here, but I imagine the North American admins are going to be keep an iron grip on the rule book here and not allow them to switch out players. So every time they want to swap somebody, they better make damn sure they win that week, and they didn't win this week.
That's a shame, yeah. If you're going to do something tricky, you might as well have a trick that works, I suppose. Let's move ahead to what's coming up next week. That's a whistle-stop tour of NA. Next week, we've got a number of great games. We've got on January 26th, we've got 4 Zoomers versus the A-Team. On January 28th, we've got Undying versus 5 Man Midas and EG versus Black and Yellow. On January 31st, we've got Quincy Crew versus 4 Zoomers and Sad Boys versus A-Team. The obvious match that stands out to me there is Quincy Crew versus 4 Zoomers, a classic of the NA region this year or last year. Are there any others that would be watchable for you?
Well, there's a lot of very popular streamers on Black and Yellow, so the EG versus Black and Yellow game I imagine is going to get a lot of viewership, but it is the Quincy Crew versus 4 Zoomers game that I think everybody's looking forward to. 5 Man Midas up against Undying. I imagine it's going to be very similar to Quincy Crew against 5 Man Midas, unfortunately. So they haven't had a great show of things so far, but they did shock and surprise me a couple times during BTS Pro Series 4. Definitely the Quincy Crew versus 4 Zoomers game on the 31st of January is what to look out for, though.
It's good to hear. Just to close up, I remembered I forgot to ask you about how Ryora did this last week after you hyped him up so much in the preview episode. Has he hit your expectations, or is he currently a little bit inconsistent?
I would say inconsistent. They ended up losing game number 1 in the series of Black and Yellow versus 5 Man Midas, but 2 games that went very long after that they won. Roy, again, he's hit and miss, and for here, I do think he's one of the strongest players inside this team here. It was just a matter of the roster shuffle at the last minute before DPC, and I think he didn't manage to get onto a team as strong as For Fun was previously.
Okay, great. Well, we'll leave it there then. We'll look forward to those games. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week.